The following is the truth that emancipates our minds from white mental slavery. I'm not speaking to you from a position of arrogance. I'm merely telling the Black liberating truth of our plight and condition. Therefore, arrogance is uncalled for. I'm merely fulfilling my purpose, and that is to tell the truth that most Black people have been socially engineered by the white society not to see. Throughout generations, the ancestors have always provided us with those that have given the insight to see through the maze and confusion which our enemies have designed for us. Those of us that are bestowed with this gift of insight must teach the truth to our people. Our ancestors demand this of us. Those who know must teach. African proverb. The eyes are useless when the mind has been made ignorant. This is why those among us that are ignorant often views many behaviors and symptoms that presently exist amongst our people as being proof that we're either inflicted by a generational curse or a biblical curse, and or as being evidence of a slave syndrome. These are the three commonly held premises among our people in regards to our plight and our condition. These beliefs are commonly held among us because our collective minds have been manipulated to believe the fraudulent worst narratives about ourselves. White propagandists achieve this by constantly subjecting us to fraudulent Black racially demoralizing propaganda. When people have been heavily demoralized, they'll then accept and believe the fraudulent worst about themselves. However, those three noted narratives are totally untrue. Moreover, they're each designed to give the white society greater power over Black people upon our acceptance of them as being true. White oppressive forces are waging a covert war against our collective minds that most of us are totally clueless of. Here's how accepting any of those three premises gives the white society greater power over us. According to the U.S. Department of Defense Psychological Warfare Doctrine, it states that the most effective way to subdue and control a large targeted population without physically fighting them is by inundating them with fraudulent propaganda that misleads them to believe that their core problem is an internalized one. When people have been manipulated to believe that their core problem lies within themselves, this demoralizes them, divides them, makes them self-loathing and self-doubting, and it makes them believe that they therefore need their oppressors to govern over their lives. It also shifts their collective aggressions away from their oppressors and redirects it towards and against themselves. It also makes them more compliant with their oppressors' dominance over their lives. In fact, many will even prefer it. The targeted population can then be ruled over forever. The similarities between this U.S. government's psychological warfare tactic and the experiences and conditions within the African American communities are far too great for us not to see that this is precisely what's being done to us. When we accept those premises, claiming that we're afflicted by a generational curse, a biblical curse, and or are afflicted by a slave syndrome, these narratives each carry the same subliminal message that our core problem is now an internalized one. They're designed to keep us blaming our collective state onto a phantom ailment instead of appropriately against white oppressive forces. They also manipulate our collective minds in many other ways that benefits the white society. Those three premises are falsehood that give the white society greater power over us. Wake up and critically think. Doing so is not a crime yet. Is it really so hard to believe that the same narcissistic, racist, notoriously deceitful and corrupt people that have brutalized us throughout history would now exploit their monopoly over information that we receive to manipulate our minds to think in ways that serves and protects their interests? Of course. To believe otherwise, you would have to in fact be mentally enslaved by them, because this disclosure is totally consistent with the oppressors' collective behaviors demonstrated throughout history. It's the way they are, it's the way they've always been, and it's the only way they know how to be. Many Black people have been so heavily demoralized by the white society's fraudulent Black racially demoralizing propaganda campaigns that they literally find it easier to continue believing the fraudulent worst and that there's something inherently wrong with us as a people than to accept the truth that we're being lied to because it gives the white society greater power over us. Sometimes it's easier to fool people than it is to show them that they've been fooled. So therefore, let's critically think and look at the facts. If there's something internally wrong with African Americans, how then were we able to implement the most successful unified protests in U.S. history? The degree of unity and organization demonstrated among African Americans during the 1960s was extraordinary and still remains unrivaled by any other group in U.S. history. This was not achieved by Asian Americans, not by Latin Americans, not by Native Americans, nor of any other groups. The most successful unified protest in U.S. history was achieved by African Americans. This literally means that the group that came to the U.S. as an enslaved people and that was placed at the lowest level within the society are the ones that stood up the tallest and the strongest against a system of white supremacy. That's extraordinary. Even FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover said that the unification of the American Negro was the greatest threat against the nation's preservation of white supremacy. These facts totally contradict the claim that there's something inherently wrong with African Americans. They in fact demonstrate the exact opposite. Sadly, and to our detriment, the oppressed will always believe the fraudulent, worst possible narrative about themselves. The reason why white oppressive forces wants black people believing that our affliction is either a generational curse, a biblical curse, or a slave syndrome, because doing so creates a self-fulfilling prophecy that mentally enslaves us. A self-fulfilling prophecy is when people's behaviors align with the narrative they've been made to believe about themselves. It's a process through which an originally false narrative leads to its own confirmation. In a self-fulfilling prophecy, people start acting based upon the false narrative about themselves, thus making it real. Wikipedia describes self-fulfilling prophecy as the prediction that comes true as a result of a group's expectation that a narrative is true, thus making the prediction come true. People's behaviors aligns with the narratives that they've been made to believe about themselves. For example, whenever oppressors wants to divide the oppressed because they perceive the oppressed as being too unified, they do so by constantly inundating the oppressed with fraudulent propaganda, telling them that they're the most divided. Once the oppressed accepts the false narrative that they're the most divided, they start functioning based upon it, thus creating a self-fulfilling prophecy, wherein which they then become the most divided. It's an insidious social science tactic the white oppressive forces have weaponized against black people. Because white oppressive forces write our narratives, they negatively distort them in order to garner negative self-fulfilling prophecies outcomes among us. This is the truth of our plight and condition that we must confront. It's not a biblical fairy tale, not a silly slave syndrome myth, nor is it a generational curse. We must function based upon what is actually true. The white society has manipulated many black people to believe that there are many truths and that everyone's entitled to their own truths. But these ideologies are falsehood. That ideology is falsehood. We must function based upon what is true. The reality is there's not many truths. There's in fact only one truth. There are not many variations of truth. If you're not functioning based on what is true, you are actually functioning based upon what is a lie. And while most people have the right to believe whatever they choose to believe, there's a profound exception to this rule when it comes to the oppressed. The oppressed must function based upon what is true. We must get a clear, concise, and accurate understanding of our plight and condition. Because if our understandings are flawed, then all liberating remedies and solutions that stem from those flawed understandings will also be flawed. This is why those of us who know the truth, those of us who are truly awakened, we are trying to tell you the truth of our plight and condition. It's the only way to liberate ourselves. The truth of our plight and condition are directly connected to many hidden, nefarious social science tactics that white oppressive forces particularly deploys against us for maintaining their dominance and their control over us. It's being done to facilitate their long-term oppression of us. Social science is one of the branches of science devoted to the study of human behavior, specifically how people interact with each other, behave, and develop as a society. It's also being secretly used for maintaining white social dominance over black people. It's how the white society facilitates long-term oppression of black people. Although the government portrays itself publicly as a democracy in which all citizens are equal, in reality, it has always been secretly committed to the preservation of its nation's white social dominance over its black population. There is also an immense concern of massive unified black retribution, given the government's long history of either directly mistreating black people or condoning the brutal mistreatment of black people throughout history. This immense concern and unrelenting commitment resulted in white oppressive forces deploying hidden social sciences that aids them in the preservation of white dominance and that prevent the black population's ability to engage in massive retribution against the white society. Had the white society not done this, it would then have placed itself diametrically against its own self-interests. Logically, many will now ask the question of, given that there are so many other racial groups within the white dominant society, why then are the subjugation tactics deployed the harshest, the strongest against black people? It's because there are many great narratives about black people that are hidden from the public that makes black people the greatest threat against the system of white supremacy. Within all manners of warfare, the group representing the greatest threat is always attacked the harshest. The reason why most black people don't know of our great narratives that makes us the greatest threat against the system of white supremacy is because the white society deliberately withholds virtually all black racially affirming facts from black people. They instead keep us believing the fraudulent worst about ourselves, because doing so aids them in maintaining their social dominance and control over us. Here's the first reason why African Americans are deemed the greatest threat. As I summarized earlier, during the 1960s, African Americans' unified protest against the U.S. system of white supremacy was unprecedented. The brilliant organizations and mobilizations of bus boycotts, marches, freedom riders, and through civil disobedient tactics were remarkable. African Americans confronted the U.S. system of white supremacy on all fronts. It was confronted through civil disobedient tactics, militant means, nonviolent protests, and with black lawyers pleading for equality with America's highest Supreme Court. Those tactics resulted in the enactment of many civil rights laws that improved the lives of all minorities. Therefore, while all ethnic groups possess the ability to bring about real change in the United States, only African Americans have produced some changes. It's for this reason why every other minority group in fact, actually owes a debt to the African American community. But to the contrary, other minority groups have been made to look down upon African Americans, and it's by deliberate design. Because African Americans are deemed as being the greatest threat against the U.S. system of white supremacy, it became necessary to deploy propaganda campaigns that assassinated the collective character of African Americans. This prevents other minority groups from following the lead of African Americans in any future revolts against the white dominant society. This is why African Americans are constantly being denigrated within the white controlled media. It literally benefits and protects the system of white supremacy. This creates societal condition that aids in the subjugation of the group deemed as being the greatest threat. This process is known as character assassination. Here's the second reason why African Americans are deemed as being the greatest threat. After slavery was abolished in the U.S. in 1865, the advancement made by African Americans following slavery was extraordinary. In spite of receiving no reparation and being constantly plagued by the evils of white racism, African Americans built many of our own self-efficient cities across the nation. Those black-built cities often exceeded the neighboring white cities. This resulted in many white mobs rioting and destroying those black communities. Black segregated schools made a significant difference in black illiteracy. which was 30% in 1919, it had dropped to less than 7% by 1955. Black illiteracy had almost dissipated in the North, and in some areas, black illiteracy was less than white illiteracy. Such was the case in New York. In 1950, black colleges had 71,000 students. Nearly all were in the South. 553 black people had their doctorate degree. Furthermore, between the year 1870 to 1940, African Americans submitted 726 invention patents to U.S. Patent Office. For a people to go directly from being enslaved, where they were denied an education, to then producing so much inventions in such a short time span is astounding. These numbers also more than double those submitted by Caucasians during the same time frame. And during that time period, African Americans only made up less than 3% of the U.S. population, yet more than double the amount of inventions submitted by Caucasians. This pattern has never stopped. This scenario of black people outpacing whites in making and revolutionizing inventions has never changed. It's merely concealed from the public through the white society's monopoly over information. The hidden fact is that in spite of cultural traumas wrought by the injustice of white racism and slavery, most inventions that have revolutionized the world were in fact either invented by black people or were directly inspired by early inventions by black people. Without black people, there would exist no internet, no cell phones. We wouldn't have cameras or microphones on our cell phones. There would be no emails, no GPS, no hearing aids, no touch-tone phones, no caller ID, no home surveillance security systems, no game cartridges, no motorized vehicles, no steam engines, no traffic lights, no working light bulbs, no elevators, therefore no skyscrapers, no air conditioning, no modern color PC, no 3D movies, no central heating, no refrigerators, no helicopters, no washing machines, no dryers, no refrigerated trucks, no blood banks, no fiber optics, no nanotechnology. We wouldn't have the accurate weather forecasting system, no thermosanitary pad, no lawnmowers, no doorknobs, no pencil sharpeners, etc., etc. The advancement made by African Americans is extraordinary and is unrivaled by any other group. When a well-packaged web of lies has been sold gradually to the masses, the truth will seem absolutely ridiculous and speak a raving lunatic. Dresden James said that, and it's so true. The white society's negative depiction of black people is an elaborate perception management system that bears almost no relations to the reality whatsoever. While publicly denigrating us, they secretly, privately envy us. The truth of the matter is that white people invented the patent office and have always used it to steal the intellectual property rights from black people. In order for black inventors to get their inventions mass produced, they have to go before white companies. These white companies acquires the right to these inventions and then places white faces in front of the technology. This scenario allows the white society to continue exploiting the intellectual geniuses of black people while maintaining the appearance that most inventions are coming from the minds of Caucasians. The following may provide a scientific reason of why it is that most inventions that revolutionized the world were either invented by black people or were directly inspired by early inventions by black people. Within two major studies, one in 1996 and the other in 2018, researchers determined the genetic contribution to intellectual giftedness by analyzing DNA samples from people around the world. According to genetics, the higher the DNA series is within a particular group, the higher the chance of genius existing within that group. In the 1996 studies, 15 genetics from 9 different universities around the world tested a DNA series of 136 people from around the world. They first tested apes. When they tested the orangutan, they found the orangutan only had 3 DNA series. When they tested the gorilla, they found that it had 4. The chimpanzee, had 5. They then studied Europeans, England, Germany, France, Russia, Spain. They found that Europeans had 6 DNA series. All other groups also have 6, except Africans. Africans have 9 DNA series. Africans therefore have the highest probability of genes existing within our group. These findings were published in a Yale University's manual. Yale published the story. In the 2018 study, researchers analyzed DNA samples from 1,238 people recruited in the results, and those results were also the same. All other groups have 6 DNA series and Africans have 9. The fact that Africans have 9 DNA series while everyone else have 6 may be a scientifically reason, which provides us an explanation of why is it that in spite of all of the brutality they've done to us, most inventions that revolutionize the world are coming from the minds of black people. See, it's a positive narrative that they hide from you. The oppressor's depiction of the oppressed is never a true one. It's always negatively distorted to serve the oppressor's nefarious hidden agendas against the oppressed, against the oppressed. This has remained a consistent factor in history and especially still true now in regard to black people living under white dominance. The white ruling elite secretly deem black intelligence, as demonstrated throughout history, as being an immense threat to the preservation of white social dominance. They determined that something had to be done to ensure that the preservation of white social dominance over black people continues, and something must be done to stifle our demands for equality. White social scientists determined that by negatively distorting everything that black people believes about ourselves collectively, that they can condition us to perceive ourselves through a false marginalized identity that aids the white society in maintaining its social dominance over us. And also by negatively distorting what everyone believes about us, this can sustain false assumptions within society that also aids in maintaining white social dominance over black people. So they deployed an elaborate perception management system. Your perception of reality is an elaborate white deception. Perception management is a propaganda technique that involves altering the public's perception of reality to suit the objectives of the ruling class. It's an essential part of modern information warfare. In order for the white society to maintain its social dominance over black people, it's crucial to keep black people believing the fraudulent worse and fraudulent lesser about ourselves. So deception is essential. To meet this objective, white governments deploys in many fraudulent negative narratives they deploy against black people to keep us believing the fraudulent less about ourselves. It's deployed like a massive media marketing campaign that keeps the black masses believing a fraudulent worse narrative about ourselves. Come on, this isn't hard to see when you critically think. Can you not see how cartoonishly unrealistic it actually is that all narratives that we receive about ourselves from white society are negative? Everything about us are negative. It tells our children are the dumbest. We make the lowest scores on tests. Everything about us is negative. We're the worst, we're the worst, we're the worst. Why do they put so much energy and time? And do you not see how cartoonishly unrealistic it actually is? That everything, there are African Americans, 89 years old, and have never once in their life heard a positive narrative comes about us from the hierarchy, from the white establishment. Everything about us are negative. Can you not see how cartoonishly unrealistic it actually is? If we were truly inferior, they wouldn't have to work so hard to convey it. If they were truly superior, they wouldn't have to tell so many lies to convey that. We must recognize the white society is waging a war against our minds. Not all wars are on the battlefield. Most wars are deployed in the mind. We must stop speaking negatively of ourselves. We must start questioning our perception of reality. Because when it's being controlled by our enemies, they will always distort our perception of realities in ways that give them greater power over us. Black people, it's time to wake up. If you are sitting there trying to liberate yourself based on the Bible or Willie Lynch, you're among the ignorant ones. You're among the ignorant ones. And those of us who are telling you the truth are trying to free you from a mental prison that you don't even know you're trapped within. It's time to wake up to our reality. We've now been in this country for more than 400 years. If you're walking around still believing our place next to a Bible that was brutally beaten into the minds of our ancestors, you are among the ignorant ones, and you should be damn ashamed of yourself. One love and peace.